What's going on, YouTube? Earth Power here with CVH.
Oh, the camera cuts off. There's a cat. I can't get it on the camera. How's it going, everybody? Nice to see y'all.
We
Welcome.
got some deck profiles for you today. The very last group of deck profiles: light, water, dark, nature, forcive, ice sword. One of the newest contenders here on the channel for season three's bracket tournament, and then light, water, nature, Alcadeias, and light, fire, nature, turbo burn. The season two runner-up.
Oh yeah.
Set to take on Rub Control, which Rub Control, Rub Mid Range, whatever we're calling that deck now. The one
Whatever
that
you want
made
to
it
call
out
it.
of the play-in. Yeah, one of the only gatekeepers to do that.
Yeah,
So yeah, you're a fan of this deck. I like
I am a fan of this
light
deck.
water, light water, dark nature, ice sword. Tell the people about it. You've had a little bit more experience with it than I have, especially with the latest IDC.
Yeah, I hope I'm not crediting anyone wrong, but I believe Himne began the trend of this deck, probably even just created the deck and won an IDC 29, I think, with it. And then IDC 31, where I got third Dark Signer, played this deck to either a top 8 or a top 4 finish. Can't remember, but that's pretty much all it's seen as far as like competitive tournaments, and it's done pretty well in both. So we retooled it a bit and put it in this bracket in our 40 card format with only 2 swaps. I mean, this deck is usually 40, but we had to put the other swaps into other cards, and I think what we changed from Himne's build is a second Fighter Dual Fang, and maybe it's Arcadeias, maybe it's the stream. I don't remember what else wasn't played.
Yeah,
But yeah, this is a deck that leans heavily on Ice Sword. Sorry, it leans heavily on Ice Vapor and Sky Sword, hence the deck's name. And
yeah.
Ice Vapor crushes the control matchups, and Sky Sword and Soulswap repetition. Can't even talk. Repetition. Yikes. What time
Been a
is it?
night
What the hell?
late.
Um. Anyway, you play Sky Sword a bunch with Soul Swap, and that should beat the aggressive decks. Happens a little bit less in this deck because it only has 2 Soul Swaps, but that is the general idea.
Yeah, I think my
Yeah.
favorite thing about this deck is that it very much feels like Duel Master's version of an anti-meta deck, right? Ice Vapor handles the control matchups. Sky Sword handles the rush and aggro matchups. And then it just plays a top end that's really annoying to deal with. Multiple like 4 Surfer, Pit, Holy All. It has all of the triggers that you want. The 4 of Gigaballs, a slash locomotive, or whatever one you're feeling for whatever given day.
Yeah.
Couple of soul swaps. The deck just on paper seems strong, right? It's one of those things where it feels like it doesn't really have a terrible matchup. I think the one thing that you can pin on this deck is that it is just a little slow getting off the ground against some of the more like rush decks, some of the more like heavier aggros that curve out on 4. Just because your opening 4 turns probably aren't going to be super strong. But you lean on your triggers at that point. I think versions of this in the future could see cards like Emerald if you're really afraid of aggro, or if aggro is
Yeah.
more prevalent in
Dark
any given
Signer.
meta.
Dark Signer put 2 emeralds in, and I think that's a good call.
Yeah,
There's some other 2s you can play too, but this is the only deck in the bracket that has 0 turn 2 plays. Wild.
right, right. So, but I mean, the whole crux of this deck, right, is getting to 5 on curve, whether that's turn 4 or or soul swapping into it with bronze, or using bronze arm tribe to curve into it on 4, or using soul swap for the Hulkus plays. But getting ice,
Vapor.
I keep wanting to say ice sword too. I'm right
Sorry.
there with you.
Yep.
Getting ice vapor or sky sword out on board as early as possible to deal with whatever particular matchup you're in. The deck's strong. The deck's
Yeah.
really strong, and then the curve from there is Fighter Dual Fang, Blue Marcus, and those cards are just terribly annoying to deal with.
Yeah, and you got the power plays and Plague when you're trying to pressure, or Lost Soul when you're just trying to ramp into that against control, and that's your game plan there. Yeah, it's a very fun attrition based, like sort of incremental advantage deck. You know,
Yeah,
it doesn't just outright win the game in a play, but like it just whittles the opponent down and like beats him down and just gets that
yeah,
advantage. The biggest play it can make is a Lost Soul against control, but besides that, you're just getting that little bit of farther ahead every turn, ideally. So fun, kind of my jam.
absolutely. And it's set to play against Lightwater Nature, Alcadeias.
You're a fan
The
of this
card that was,
deck. You've played it a
yeah, no,
bunch.
I like it a lot. Shout outs to, is it How Far that ended up winning a CIDC with this.
Something.
The whole Olorus into Alcadeias idea, right? Who says you need more than 4 bait for an evolution? We ended up retooling. Cyforce ended up coming out of this from season 2. We're playing the additional Sky Sword now, and otherwise this deck is pretty much identical to the one that we brought to season 2. But yeah, right. Same idea as last time. Just curve out, having poisonous mushroom, bronze arm tribe early. If you can poisonous mushroom into Soulswap, that is a very strong play with Misterios, which lets this deck just kind of take off and go right. Like this, Alcadeias functions very similarly to Alzonius, I think, in that same sense, where it's got that one big boss creature that when it hits the board is nigh impossible to deal with, minus decks that have Surfer, just creature based bounce and removal. Alcadeias shuts down whole decks, whole control decks. You guys have seen it in season 1 when we were playing the weird Pegasus version. Season 2 last season when it faced off against Turbo Burn and what might have been just one of the best matches of that season. And now it's set to play against Ice Vapor, which has surfers and could give
Does.
this deck a run for its money, in the sense that, yeah, Alcadeias shuts down a good portion of that deck, but doesn't shut down the important things. So it'll be an interesting matchup for sure, and one I'm excited to get in the booth for.
Yeah, I like this deck a lot. It's fun that it can be like a Misterios value deck or an Ulurus beatdown deck that just also has Alcadeias to just completely win a couple matchups. So a weirdly flexible deck, even though the Alcadeias decks of old were very one note. This one is
Yeah,
much more fun, I think.
absolutely. And
Moving
that brings us,
on.
yeah, to our final deck in the top 16. You know it, you love it. CVH piloted it all the way to a top 2 finish. They runner up in season 2, Light Fire Nature, Turbo Burn.
And something we don't mention about Turbo Burn is it actually was like an early standout deck in the IDC tournament. Like someone won like maybe IDC 1 or 2 with the Turbo Burn deck that really,
Yeah,
if you look at it,
yeah,
isn't that different from this. Like it was 40 cards. This is 40 cards, like roughly a lot of the same cards, like a couple here and there, maybe like 20% different tops.
yeah,
But I like the way this deck has evolved. I mean, there's tons of different versions of this in the IDC. I say tons. There's a few. But like some people run Fairy Life, more Mana Crisis. Some people go really heavy into the burn. We sort of took a middle of the road approach. I mean, 3 Reap and Sow, 3 Sky Sword. You could see these cards as 4-ofs if you want. But we wanted to fit in the 4 Mysterios this time. And we're still playing the Dragons as backup finishers. We've still got the 4. Now, I think it might have been 3. Now, it's definitely 4 Fortress Shell, I think, in both seasons.
yeah,
And
yeah.
the Cataclysmic Eruption, which I just think is one of the sickest cards that exists.
It's it's a fun one, right? So like this deck, and again, all of these kind of mid-rangey, like you call them, attrition-based decks. Like this deck very much has a singular game plan, which is get your Essence Elf on 2, start mana ramping, use cards like Reap and Sow to keep your opponent in that 3 to 4 to 5 mana zone, while you get to 7 to 8. Start swapping in Fortress Shells and just keep them under 6 mana over the course of the game, and then go wide using cards like Mysterios and Foul Ego to cycle your cards. The cool thing about this deck versus your standard kind of force and mana burn, right, is that it gets fire. Decks like this struggle with decks that go wide on them. Mana burn's biggest weakness is just a lot of creatures on board all at once, because it's really only mass removal spell is either Holy All, which means you have to have a board to contest, or Plague, which at best is just one of the better, if you're already ahead, get ahead and finish the game cards. This deck gets access to APOC,
Mhm.
Searing Wave, cards that just deal with that aggression early. And it has the ramp and cards like Essence Elf to just help those cards deal with boards before you necessarily need to set up Mysterios and start going into Fortress Shell. It just kind
Mhm.
of lends itself to the game plan. This deck feels like it has everything it needs to succeed. And I think the one card that you didn't mention when you were going over some of the list earlier is that I think the cards where the 4 of Reap and Sow, 4 of Sky Sword would normally be kind of the what this deck wants to do. There's 2 Mana Crisis in this version. We didn't have them last season in this deck. The goal was to, if you can hit it right, the progression very similar to what we saw with the the Nasus 3-Civ Deformer Burn is hitting your curve in Essence Elf, into Mana Crisis, into Reap and Sow. Keeping your opponent at that 2 to 3 mana, depending on who's on the play. And then you're just at 6-7 mana, your opponent's at 2 or 3, and you're just winning.
Yeah. So I mean, if you want, you could change the numbers and play like Fairy Lives to make that more consistent. 4 Mana Crisis for you, but so you could go that hard. This is sort of a middle of the road approach, but you do get more flexibility, I think. You have to play more real Duel Masters with your opponent at a reasonable mana. But yeah, besides the normal progression of like Bronze Arm, Skysword, APOC, with the Essence Elves and with Reap and Sows and with Volcano Charger, like turn 5 APOC happens kind of a lot. So even though you only have one Searing Wave, you are board clearing when you need to, even though there isn't that much board clearing in the deck. I like it. It's a fun deck.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it seems like Bombazar just steals games when you don't mana burn sometimes too. So fun one of.
Yeah, just having a finisher in there is great. A finisher that essentially is just needs to be answered, or it's going to start winning you the game. Yeah, it's up against. Speaking of Bombazar, it's up against Rub Midrange, which on paper, right, looks like a tough matchup for Rub. Rub somehow made it out of that Nasus burn, the Deformer burn list that we had. Ended up winning that game somehow. And it's up against another, one might say, more formidable mana burn deck here in Light Fire Nature Turbo Burn. So
Perhaps.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, we'll see how that goes as we near the end of the week. So stay tuned for that, guys. Final thoughts?
That's all I got. We made it through all the deck profiles. If you missed any, they're all on the channel. And if you're looking for the Rub profile, it's way back because it was in Flame.
Yeah.
So go back and check that out a few weeks ago. Or a few months ago, maybe at this point. Who knows?
Absolutely. God knows, man. Yeah, we're almost through top 16. Last 2 matches going up this week, and then we will be proceeding on to top 8. And yeah, nearing the end of not trying to write off a good thing too soon, but season 3 finals is fast approaching. Let us know what you think, guys. Yeah, all of these decks are super fun. Let us know if you think any of these are going to make a run at the finals. If Light Fire Nature Turbo Burn can do it again. And yeah, until next time, guys. Peach.